Welcome to White Pill Radio, the roughly every other episode version of Theology on Air, which is an outgrowth of Theology by the Pint, which is a monthly gathering in Houston where youngish people have craft beer and food, and we talk about interesting things, theology, politics, ethics, philosophy, usually in some kind of debate format. So theologybythepint.org is where you should go to learn more about that. But this particular episode, because the podcast tries to cover ground that we can't cover, of course, in our monthly gathering, this one in particular is ultimately hopeful, post-apologetic, applied theology that looks at news and current events from a Christian worldview. I like to say that this is blessed talk, but not happy talk. So no silly, superficial talk here. We're going to get right into the issues and be unafraid, as we're told to be today. Anyway, we're going to be unafraid to tackle controversial topics and look at it, hopefully, from a Christian worldview. I am Evan McClanahan. I'm the pastor at First Lutheran. And unfortunately, Sarah is not with us today because it's Christmas season and she's really busy. And we had our big event this week, which was an Ask Us Anything. So you might want to check that out on our YouTube. Did I mention we have a YouTube channel? I'm looking at the wrong camera now. We have a YouTube channel, and you will want to check that out. By the way, if you see gashes on my head, I got hit by a baseball last night. That's why I look like Frankenstein. That's why I'm sitting on this side of the table this week. You'll have to go to YouTube to see that. Anyway, what was I saying? Theologybythepint.org, I think is what I was saying. So go there.
And our YouTube page.
Go check us out on YouTube, subscribe, give us a thumbs up, podcast, do the same. All that stuff is really important. We do appreciate it. And with us, I think maybe kind of for his first White Pill Radio is Max. Do people know your last name?
It's Antone.
Antone. All right. Sounds good. And you were actually on our panel a while back, or a speaker on our Christian Nationalism event that we had, and the follow-up we had, which I think was a White Pill Radio episode, but regardless. You've been here before. Good to have you back.
It's good to be back.
It was going to just be Ken and I.
Those are fun.
What's your name?
My name is Ken. I'm an accountant.
Okay. And that's all you're going to know? If you want to know more about Ken, you got to come to our events live. It was just going to be Ken and I. And that sounds... Anyway.
Those episodes are fun.
Yeah, those episodes are fun. Like I said, I need... Max, where are you at? Check your text thread here. Okay. So we drug him in off the street, fresh from a dinosaur dig or something. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, we're going to do a whole episode about dinosaurs and young Earth stuff in the future. Anyway.
Should be
okay. Cool. But let's jump in. We maybe don't have a ton of stories this time, so we'll just see how it goes. But we want to kind of go into some depth, I think, on a couple of topics that have come up. And one is, well, if I might be so self-serving, it's an essay that I wrote for the Everyman Commentary, which is now Substack, so you can subscribe there for free and get all of the authors' their writings, including my own, or you can subscribe to my church newsletter and get my articles there. But my basic question is this. If abortion is a states' rights issue, then why shouldn't or wouldn't slavery be the same? So let me just read a little bit of what I wrote, and then we'll kind of just jump off and take it from there. The 2024 election was supposed to be all about abortion. The left was supposed to respond to the horrors of the Dobbs decision by showing up en masse to support Kamala Harris, but that didn't really happen. President-elect Trump, well, I would say brilliantly dodged, maybe not brilliantly, but he dodged and weaved his way around the issue by taking credit for Dobbs, putting abortion back in the domain of the states, which is what the Dobbs decision did. It said abortion's not going to be federally regulated anymore, that Roe v. Wade did. It's going to be an issue that every state can decide, and Trump is saying that's a great thing. So people in California can kill their baby up to 9 months of gestation in the womb, and Texas can essentially outlaw it except for the abortifacient pill. Anyway, so the states are pretty much free to decide what they're going to do. I don't give Trump any credit for being a thought leader on the issue. I think in some ways his stance was quite cowardly. Basically, I think you're caving on this issue if you say, well, it's just a states' rights issue. Because is abortion a states' rights issue? How can that be the case when we fought an entire civil war? Because states were told that they did not have the unilateral moral authority to allow the ownership of human beings, but now those same states have the moral authority to allow the killing of a human being. This is the kind of distrust, or inconsistency rather, that leads to distrust, alienation, and maybe a national divorce of some kind in the future. So I try to give some examples where we have a national identity that leads to federal laws and the federal regulation of laws by institutions like the IRS or the FBI. Of course, Ken is like, well, I don't agree with any of those being
As big as they are.
Yeah. But, but we have agencies that, the EPA and hundreds of other agencies that regulate us at a federal level.
Sure.
So there are all these sorts of things. I mean, every time you go into a bank, you're participating in a federal transaction to some degree, because every bank is covered by the FDIC, and they get their money for the Federal Reserve. And
your dollar says this is this is legal tender.
Yeah.
They use that.
If you're on an interstate highway, you're on.
Sure.
I think I can say like federal property. That may not be exactly right, but you get the idea. If you go to the federal building downtown in Houston, so there are things, segregation, discrimination, slavery, all these major race issues were, demanded a federal response. Now, states do clearly have some discretion. In Texas, for example, we do not have a state income tax. Yay, Texas. So states can make certain decisions about what is important and what not. So how do we decide? Like, what is the heuristic? Is that the right word? What is the heuristic or the hermeneutic in preaching terms to decide when something sort of magically becomes a state's issue or becomes a federal issue? And if slavery is such a moral wrong, so that it is demanded in federal law and even amendment to the Constitution to outlaw it, why wouldn't abortion be the same?
I have two corrections to a line in here.
Yes.
It says Civil War was fought because states were told they did not have the unilateral moral authority to own slaves. No, Civil War was fought because of secession, right?
Okay.
Which is different than a Civil War being fought about slavery. Secession was about slavery, but the war was fought about secession.
Okay.
And also,
but most people
the Emancipation Proclamation freed the slaves, right?
Yeah.
Is not. So that would have happened after the Civil War started.
Gotcha.
Right.
It also freed the slaves only in
the rebellion.
Confederacy.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. Say what?
Emancipation Proclamation freed the slaves.
Talk right into that mic too.
The Emancipation Proclamation freed the slaves only in the Confederate states. Slavery was still practiced and legal in some of the Union states. It was an effort to destabilize their enemy and cause an internal uprising.
Yes.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Well. Okay, so by the way, do states have the right to secede?
I would argue yes, and one of my favorite historical figures from around that period, his name is William Lloyd Garrison. He had a newspaper that he would publish in the New England states, begging them to secede. This is like a decade before the Civil War. He wanted New England states to secede from the Union under the banner. His newspaper was called The Liberator. Under the banner, no union with slaveholders. He thought that slavery, and he was a bit of an anarchist himself. I personally love William
Your
Lloyd.
heart just as warmed.
I love William Lloyd Garrison and give me one more second. So under the banner, no union with slaveholders, he was begging New England states to secede from the Union. And I have no doubt in my mind that Sherman would have marched north had they done that. The war was about secession, right? Secession turned out to be about slavery. I would love to see an alternate history where northern states secede. And, we have a very fragmented United States that are more similar to the European Union than what we have now.
Well, embedded in the name of our nation is the concept of federalism, is the concept of, what we are. We are states.
Big Hamiltonian, are you?
I don't know enough about the Federalist Papers or whatever to say, but I mean, I'm just saying, if you just explicate the name, we are states that have come together for a common cause and common purpose. Sure. Common defense, common trade, maybe common currency over time. Whatever. Whenever it's more beneficial that we're together than we have 50 nations, or what became 50 at the time was whatever 13 or however many colonies it was 13. But you get the idea. So it seems to me that given the primacy of the state, that they did have a right to secede, which is no defense of slavery. But that's just my own take of it. And I don't think that question has ever been answered, and it's sort of a festering sore, I think, in this country. Because once you lose that kind of voluntarism, you arguably lose, kind of the very freedom that we claim to love. But that said, okay, so let's just then, if we took slavery, let's look at segregation, though. Sure. I mean, it wasn't a civil war. But I mean, the whole civil rights movement,
Civil Rights Act of 1964. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, but the National Guard escorting the young girl into school, and there was a massive riots at Ole Miss. General Edwin Walker was there. He was the guy that supposedly Lee Harvey Oswald shot at in his house in Dallas. But anyway, so civil rights was obviously a very contentious issue. Okay, and we didn't say then that was a states' rights issue, and all that was a business has to serve whoever comes into its store. A cake baker has to serve gay customers. It doesn't have to make a gay supporting cake, but has to serve gay customers.
And this would include forcible integration in schools, et cetera, right?
Yeah, the whole busing argument, Kamala
Which
and
you
all that.
support or don't?
What? Forced integration?
Forced integration, and more broadly, the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
I believe I think I support. I haven't read it, in detail. But everything I know about the Civil Rights Act of 1964, yes, I would agree with. Now, I pause because it's being used. I mean, the what was it called? The Fairness Act?
The Fairness Doctrine?
Fairness Doctrine, yeah. The whole thing where they wanted to, I think actually Joe Biden did this by executive order. I think it's been repealed or was found unconstitutional or something, but he added LGBT to the Civil Rights.
Oh, never mind. Fairness Doctrine is something else. You're saying
that's like the talk radio thing.
Yes.
Okay. I can't remember what. Anyway, I'm sorry.
Anyways, there are things that the federal government does. A lot of the things that you mentioned earlier, we kind of all probably have problems with. So the good things that the federal government does, have the ability to do, levy taxes, tariffs, national defense, right? Those are kind of the things that you're getting at that you both all agree on, right? Okay. So you're comparing like that to...
Yeah, I think it's in the common interest of, say, both Louisiana and Mississippi and Texas that we, have a tariff on steel or something like that. Right?
And that we have open borders between them, too.
Yeah.
Between the states.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a big border, It'd be hard to manage that. But, okay, so I guess my point is, if segregation is important enough that we need a federal regulation, then why isn't abortion, and why can't conservatives say that?
I think that we can say that. It's I'm not sure what would prevent them from saying otherwise, other than maybe they want the approval of men over what God says. If abortion is murder, then it should be a federal issue. And coming at it from the Christian nationalist point, because we want our federal government to be concerned with the moral laws based on the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not murder, absolutely qualifies as something that, it supersedes the rights of the states. No one state should say, well, we can do it, and it's up to us.
And it's already been, J.D. Vance was asked, I think, in his New York Times interview, if a citizen of Texas, where it's illegal, goes to California, does the district attorney where that person lives in Texas, can they file charges? I mean, that's a thorny issue that we don't have an answer to. I guess the Supreme Court at some point is going to rule if a Texas citizen goes to California to have an abortion at 8 months, could they be charged for murder?
Sarah Stone here. Sorry to interrupt what I'm sure is a riveting podcast episode, but Theology by the Pint needs your help to continue providing these podcasts, offering our in-person events, and growing so we can bring thoughtful conversation and the hope of the gospel to a world that's increasingly walking away from church and from faith. Now that we're a 501c3 nonprofit, all donations are tax deductible, so we've crunched the numbers, and if each listener of this episode gave just $1 for each episode you listen to, we'd put a huge dent in our annual budget. So consider giving today. Go to theologybythepint.org/give and click the link to donate. Thanks so much. And now back to our show.
And, it's a jurisdictional question, So again,
let me be clear. I think abortion is murder, right? And I also think murder is not handled federally. We have death, matters of life and death are handled state by state. Some states have death penalty, some don't, right? Getting a capital,
but there are some. Okay, no, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, there are some federal murders, right? Like, for example, if you kill an FBI officer.
Yeah,
sure.
Federal agent.
It may be rare, but even this week, I think Biden was asked to pardon 40 people on death row. I believe they're in federal prison for committing murders and such.
Usually felony murder or federal. If it's a murder that they would be in federal prison for, I would think it would be because they're violating another law in commission of that is a federal crime, like
robbing a store and
or firearms, right? Like if you have a certain type of firearm, right, then it would be a different kind of court that tries you because it would be in addition to, right? You can have like there are certain things that when you tack on felonies to a misdemeanor, both of them are more than the sum of their parts. In the legal system.
Gotcha. Okay, but did you want to argue?
Well, I was saying that even though I am very pro-life and I think that abortion is murder, I don't want the entire United States to have one rule for matters of life and death. I want all states to have no death penalty, but I do not want that to be like a gavel at the national level that decrees that.
But would you want that? Do you agree with the Civil Rights Act? Since you're an anarchist, you can always say, well, I don't believe in...
I don't. I value freedom of association even more than I value freedom of speech, right? Freedom of association is the entire reason freedom of speech matters. I like the idea of both, like Malcolm X saying, we don't need white people, we're going to create like a black support system for ourselves. I don't think that should be federally illegal, but under the Civil Rights Act, it would have been, right?
The same issues are coming up now because in the wake of all the BLM stuff, you have black-only dormitories, black-only, graduation ceremonies and such at colleges. I don't know how many, but enough to where it's gathering attention.
And I think it's ridiculous to have white-only stuff, and I also think it's ridiculous to make a big national deal if some, dorks in their redneck trucks want to have a whites only country club, right? They deserve to be mocked for that in the same way that the Black Hebrew Israelites deserve to be mocked for their ridiculous views.
Yeah. I mean, I tend to think that forced integration, like the busing program, was a total failure. I do think that I think that had we done history differently, that we would have actually have a lot. I think there could have been many, many things that could have been done differently, that we would have far better race relations in this country. Sure. Which we don't need to necessarily relitigate here. But,
and we can't run the counterfactual, right? We can't go back and make sure the 1964 Act doesn't pass and see what history would have looked like. Right. I'm very curious about that too.
But the Malcolm X school says that instead, and we've talked about this on the show before, but you do have the Malcolm X school, you have the Martin Luther King school. I'm much more in the Malcolm X school, which says, we need to stop waiting on white liberals to rescue us. They're like little Satans, They actually Nation of Islam believes that white people are little devils. Sure. They mean that quite literally. But that said, stop waiting on them to save us. We need to build our own community. So through the family, through having children, through gun ownership, through business ownership, forget it. We'll have our own communities and we'll be strong and we'll beat them at their own game. That's a positive message, and ultimately, waiting around for someone to save us. This actually came up with the, in fact, we don't have the Daniel Penny stories in here.
Or the CEO assassination, if you're talking about the...
Forget that. So maybe we can just talk about that. But, that came up in the wake of the Daniel Penny exoneration or acquittal in the trial in New York. Basically someone... I think Jordan Neely's father said, "Who's going to save us?" Or someone outside the courtroom said, "Who's going to save us?"
Real quick, Daniel Penny is the Marine?
Yes.
He was a Marine on a New York subway where Jordan Neely, a mentally ill homeless man, was we don't exactly know what was happening before, but there was an altercation that led to the death of Jordan Neely. Jury acquitted him just a couple days ago. Yeah.
And that's
Penny, that is.
Quite a sea change, and the reaction to it is quite a sea change from what we might have seen 4 or 5 years ago,
right,
where white man kills black man, riots ensue, etc. And this time around, not only did a partially black jury, but a majority female jury acquitted him in New York City. And so I think
they ride the subway. They know that subway culture is crazy.
Yeah. But anyway, so I don't know, how do we get on that? Malcolm X, forced integration, states' rights. Yeah.
Well, and
Max I think has been trying to.
Neither one of them are going to get the death penalty. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Say that one more time.
Daniel Penny would never have gotten tried for capital murder because it's in New York. And this Luigi Macaroni guy is not going to.
Luigi Macaroni. No, he kills a guy, obviously premeditated, obviously in what you would call cold blood.
He won't get the death penalty.
And he's getting second degree murder charge, which is insane. Like,
it should be first degree.
I know that states have different definitions. Like, for example, Texas, I don't think Texas has capital murder. They don't use first and second degree language. So states can have different ways of defining what murder is, what manslaughter is, negligent homicide, blah, blah, blah. And that, that's fine. But I'll just lay my cards on the table. Like, abortion should be federally regulated. And I think it has to be federally allowed up to 9 months, or I think it has to be federally banned. I don't know. I don't see any middle ground because it's totally arbitrary as to say when life begins.
Well, I'm not sure how to articulate this exactly, but I think we need to draw a distinction between when we say it's a federal issue versus a state's issue. At the federal level, they say it must be illegal across the board, but each individual state, you decide how you deal with it.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's not like the federal government.
Are you splitting the baby? No, I'm kidding.
I don't.
That's hilarious.
Wisdom of Solomon is all. No.
Well, no, not even that. It's
You're
just
threatening to split the baby.
It's just saying under the authority of the federal government, each of the states, you have the authority to deal with this crime as you see fit, but it cannot be legal.
Right.
I'm not sure if there's
just like murder.
Legal
well, just my example in the piece is like in the movie The Purge, right? If Texas said we're going to do the purge, right? One night anyone can commit crime. Right. That means murder is essentially legal, right? And someone was a victim of that, and they said, wait a minute, Texas, in doing this essentially led to the death of my father. I'm going to sue the state of Texas. It would go up to the Supreme Court, and would the Supreme Court say, well, if the state said you have a right to murder? No, the federal government would say, almost certainly, the Supreme Court would say almost certainly, murder is wrong. Like, to the degree to which we are a nation, we agree that murder is wrong, and a state can't say otherwise. Mm-hmm. So my only question, if that is the case, why wouldn't it be true of the unborn?
The states even do, though. The jurisprudence around, like, stand your ground is going to be different state to state. What one state might call murder, the other one might call self-defense.
Yeah.
There's tons of matters of even murder that are left up to the state. Now, again, I am pro-life. I do not want a federal government that is big enough to make a rule for all 50 states because I don't want that rule to be Roe versus Wade. Right. Like, even though it wasn't legislated, it was legislated from the bench. I don't want that rule for all 50 states to be Roe versus Wade.
No, I'd rather be able to live in Texas, which says that abortion is illegal, than to have something like a law. Like if they put, Roe really wasn't law.
It was legislated from the bench.
That's why states did. I believe Texas did have a 20-week limit on abortion. And so they could get that through even with Roe standing.
That was as low as Roe would allow.
Yeah,
right.
Because they have viability standards, right? And such. So, but yes, I agree with you. I don't want a federal allowance of it. But again, like. But I just don't know why abortion doesn't reach the threshold of being federally regulated if bank robbery does. Literally going into a bank and stealing $10 is a federal crime.
Yeah, banks are backed by the FDIC. It's a Federal Reserve issue. Yeah.
So how? It just doesn't make sense. And I do have a white pill about this, but yes.
I think that's a question you'd have to pose to someone outside of this room because I think we're both on your side of this issue.
I think so. Well, and if Ken isn't, I'll just be like, well, he's an anarchist. What are you going to
do? Just what I'm saying is a government big enough to prohibit it is also going to be a government big like enough that legislates that it must be legal.
Yeah. That's like the main thing the government should do, though, is prohibit murder. Like if government has one function, if it only did one thing, it would be like help people in hurricanes and stop people and prohibit murder. So. But here's my white pill. I think that the Dobbs decision is not going to stand. Anyway, it's not going to stand because it's incomplete. Because it's going to be obvious that this issue is not resolved by just sending it to the states, and here's why: you're going to have a case where someone is going to commit a really heinous abortion that grosses
Gosnell
out.
Yeah,
you're going to have like. So I'm trying to use the Evan cams, for the viewer, they're going to get visually bored. Okay. You're going to have a case where, where it's so heinous, like an 8.5 month abortion.
Kermit Gosnell. Yeah.
Yeah. Kermit Gosnell in Philadelphia, the guy that had babies, in jars in his. I mean, he's like the most prolific serial killer in all of America,
for sure.
Like truly. Anyway, so and someone's going to go from Texas, where it would be illegal, to California to get that procedure done, and there's going to be a question, and there's going to be some district attorney somewhere who prosecutes that person, under their state jurisdiction because they're a citizen of that state or a resident of that state, and it's going to go up to the Supreme Court, and they're going to have to decide, and I think, so I think that issue is going to come about, and then the other thing that's going to come about is we're going to get the stats, the post-Dobbs statistics on abortion, and they're not going to be as low as the pro-life community says it wants it to be. The pro-life community says that they believe that abortion should be abolished, that they believe abortion should be unthinkable, that they believe abortion should be zero. I don't think that's the case. A lot in the pro-life community want to regulate abortion in the way that the slave owners wanted to regulate slavery. Well, we won't lash them 40 times. We'll lash them 30 times. Well, we won't break up the families, or we'll allow there to be break up the families. Abortion isn't something that should be regulated. It should be abolished. And so when the stats come out, as hard as it is to find these stats, and we find that we're still allowing 500,000 abortions every year. Oh, we're down from 1 million, but it's still 500,000 because in Texas, you can murder your own child up to 12 weeks with mifepristone, even though we have a total ban on abortion, and no one, not the mother, not the drug provider, not the father, will be prosecuted under the current law if they kill their baby up to 12 weeks, which is not viable, but it's a pretty good sized human being with arms and legs and eyes and ears and heartbeats and nerve centers and feels pain and the whole deal. That's legal, even in a state like Texas, which has about the harshest ban on abortion. So I think this is going to come to a head. I think the Dobbs is going to prove to be insufficient.
Well, I have a white pill, which is going to be the topic of our next Theology by the Pint in January. I think technology progression is probably the method by which we make abortion unthinkable. Viability is only getting earlier and earlier. That's number one. That's going to be in the next 50 years. In the next 50 to 100 years, I think external wombs and things like CRISPR and being able to ensure that 100% of implanted embryos that implant into an exo-womb are gestated to viability, right? Which is way better than the natural 70% miscarriage rate before a woman even knows she's pregnant now, right? That embryo, if we all believe life begins at conception, that embryo doesn't implant and passes 70% of the time. If we all believe life begins at conception, those are deaths. And if we can move humanity...
Not abortions.
But not murders,
Not murders, but still deaths. And
I hear what you're saying.
And if we can move that to an exo womb with a much higher than 70% death, or lower than 70% death rate, it's like the self-driving car question, right?
I actually agree with you.
Bingo.
Maybe for different reasons, but I do think the advance of technology is really, and we're seeing it even now, the fact that certain countries can't hide their war crimes anymore because everybody has a camera, and the ease and rapidity of access of information, you're starting to see more and more people realize what a horror this practice is, and come to the realization that it is a moral evil and should be stopped.
Yeah. White pill.
And that's to say, it's not that viability isn't important, but it has nothing to do with whether or not that fetus is a human being.
Yeah. And slavery took decades. The story of William Wilberforce, I think, 30 years in Britain before the slave trade was outlawed, and we had to fight a civil war over it. So, things take time. I'd like to think that we don't have to fight a war over it or have a national divorce, but I just don't think that there's any way that we can have any kind of national unity as long as one state allows this and another state.
But I want a national divorce.
Well, I wrote an article a while back where I kind of thought war gamed it out, I guess, or thought experimented on it. And I think the bottom line on that is that as nice as that sounds and as lovely as the idea of something like secession does sound, where we do kind of have more independence, we have nuclear warheads in the ground in Iowa and Arkansas and California, and who gets those? And once your oceans are sort of defended by a different country, like if California becomes a different country from Texas, that makes Texas extremely vulnerable to what California might do, which might say, "Hey, China, we'd love to be a franchise of the CCP over here." Then you lose your ocean boundary.
As much as I hate California, I don't ever see that happening.
Well, there's this one line towards the end of your article I think is important. You say, abortion will tear our nation apart until we abolish it once and for all.
I said that? That sounds pretty awesome. That's
It is
pretty
awesome.
big.
I agree with that. In fact, there was something in the Christian Nationalism speech I said it was very similar, something to the effect of we can either submit ourselves to the law of God and stop murdering our own children, or we will cease to be a nation at all. We will be destroyed. And if you look biblically, there are two issues for which God destroyed wicked nations over and over and over again. It was celebration of homosexuality, sodomy, sexual degeneracy, and child sacrifice, which abortion absolutely fits that description.
Well, speaking of Christian nationalism.
Yes. Let's go. Let's give some background on this. This is a big story, big topic.
All right.
Might be all we talk about the rest of it, but it's important.
Do you want to tell everyone who James Lindsey is?
I'm not an expert. James Lindsey, New Discourses is his website and podcast. He's a guy that's come to prominence in the last 10 years in kind of conservative circles, which is a little unusual because he's an academic, he's a mathematician, but he kind of started to protest against the woke kind of stuff from kind of a more leftist point of view. So he and Peter Boghossian and what's her name?
Helen Pluckrose was the third author.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they kind of became well known because they wrote these hoax articles in academic journals that were totally wild and crazy, but they were published. And his argument was, in doing so, that's how they were exposing, what these academic journals have become, which is kind of these funded by foundations, kind of prone to the, kind of wild beliefs. They actually didn't do their, or it kind of exposed the fallacy of, what do you call that? Peer review.
Yeah.
Peer review, because, basically they could lie about,
Oh, they would present wild claims about rape culture in dog parks, right? And they would say white male dog owners had dogs that raped at like a much higher percentage than other ones. They claimed to have studied like 20,000 dogs or something like that at a dog park, which is just ridiculous for the amount of time that the study they claimed went on. But they would submit it to scientific journals, which published it without even questioning it. They had crazy feminist literature, like they took the Mein Kampf and replaced the language with feminist language. So instead of the Juden, it was the bourgeoisie. Instead of the proletariat, it was the feminist. Instead of the what did
Patriarchy?
No. What did Hitler call the people? Shoot, I'm forgetting the name.
Volk?
Okay, yes. I don't know. But instead of the people, he would just use Hitler's positive talkings about Germany and just replace Germany and the German people and the Third Reich with feminism and fourth wave feminism and all that. And they bit it. Hook, line, and sinker. All of these academic journals published.
I think they got 8 published. I think they submitted 25.
They submitted a lot, and a lot of them did get turned down.
Yeah.
But a lot of them did get published, which is
and they did so using pseudomonyms. I mean, and so they were criticized for sort of lying to the whatever. And their point was, it should be about the content. It should be about the peer review system. I mean,
right.
And so anyway, so he's pulled another one off in sort of the Christian right circles, what he calls the
woke right.
The woke right. So what is the woke right?
So what he's referring to as the woke right is a growing identitarian version of, unfortunately, Christian right-wingers who are, just going mask off when they're talking about things like Jews or women, and, all of the things that they're saying about, women sound a lot like what the woke says about white people. All of the things that they're saying about the academic elite sound a whole heck of a lot like the same thing that the left woke says about flyover country. Mm-hmm. So he's seeing shocking parallels between these two, and he's like, I call it out over here. I'm definitely going to call it out over here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he got him. he submitted the Communist Manifesto, where the same thing he did with Mein Kampf for the feminists, Mein Kampf for the feminists, he did with the Communist Manifesto with Christian nationalists. What he did, he took some words out, twisted around the bourgeoisie and proletariat, made it, feminists and academics that are the bourgeoisie, talked about like white men as the proletariat, and I think 2 or 3 Christian nationalist publications bit hook, line, and sinker.
Well, I think the one that published it was a magazine called a website called American Reformer, and I gather that is. I'd never heard of it, to be honest, until I read this article. But that seems to be the the main website where kind of Christian nationalists are gathering and sharing ideas, and within that kind of idea of like, saying this is who we are as a nation. We're Christian. We need to work towards reform. There are going to be some fringe people who kind of go, keep going one more step. And it's like, well, actually, maybe Hitler wasn't wrong about everything. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's obviously going to be threads of Holocaust denialism.
You get the Daryl Davis types that talk about like, well, Winston Churchill was the great villain of World War II.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think he's a Holocaust denier, but yes. I mean, you're going to have, I don't know, is he?
Well, he talks about resource management as a reason why the death camps weren't actually death camps.
Gotcha.
Yeah. It's, yeah.
Yeah. I did listen to a few of his podcasts. I was going to listen to the Jim Jones one, and I honestly found them to be really annoying. So
yeah.
Anyway, because I was like, "What's all the fuss about?" Do you know what I'm talking about? Martyr Made. He was on
Daryl Davis.
He was on Tucker Carlson's podcast, and it blew up because he said Winston Churchill is actually the real villain. Look, there are a lot of people who are going back and looking at Winston Churchill, being like, "Well, actually,
he's not a great guy." But I mean, like, if there was a real villain of World War II,
I would actually agree with that point.
That he's the real villain of World War II.
Certainly.
Yeah. Well, he had an empire to protect. Okay, there's no doubt that there is no doubt that his actions were often to the benefit of trying to reclaim the glory of the British Empire, which was out of gas, basically.
Well,
and far flung. And I think
eat that mic.
Yeah,
it is a complicated.
I'm not defending him.
Oh, sure.
I'm saying that was his problem. I think that's why he did villainous things. Well, to the extent he did.
I mean, the extent of his villainy has not even yet been completely uncovered, let alone publicized. And when people find out, and they will, in addition
Is this in the JFK files or something that we're going to probably get released? No.
Well, it's on a par with the MLK files, which, if they keep their word, the government will declassify those within, I think, the next 4 to 6 years, and it's going to cause some ripples. But I think just before we jump into this topic, I think one of the biggest mistakes that we make, generally speaking, whenever it comes to issues where, especially we're talking about World War II history or interpretations of history, that anyone who questions any major detail of the narrative we've been presented for the last few decades, they're instantly shoved into a corner. It's like, oh, well, you don't believe that, this many people were killed in the camps? Well, you must be a Hitler supporter. It's like, guys, stop it. Come on, we're better than this. Yeah. That is no way to...
I think it was 7 million.
Well, and it was... I mean, the number I've said is 12 million, 6 million Jews, because there's about 6 million but disabled, gypsies, homosexuals.
However, playing that game, like, separating the Holocaust from anti-Semitism, is... read Mein Kampf. You cannot separate the Holocaust from anti-Semitism, right? Yeah. A bunch of other people got swept up in it, for sure.
Yeah.
But the central theme of...
Let me take a step
But hold on. I'm way curious to hear your thoughts, though.
Well, I mean, that whole issue would take several episodes of what we're doing here now. But, I mean, in essence, what we're talking about is we're servants of truth. Mm-hmm. If something is proved to be not true, even if we've held on to it as part of our national tapestry for decades, since the 1940s, then that's a thread we have to pull out. As painful and as destructive as it may be to our current understanding of who we are as a people or what has happened, it's not revisionist. It's not lying. It's not going back and changing the facts, so to speak. It's simply trying to get back on track and understanding what really happened, because there is no... someone said once, to avoid confronting someone with an uncomfortable... It's to avoid confrontation is to exchange it's to go for short-term comfort at the expense of long-term dysfunction. And
Right.
I've kind of butchered that a little bit.
No, we understand.
Yeah. But no, so I would say there's so much to unpack. But let me agree that I think the end of World War II was clearly the transfer, essentially, of the British Empire to the American Empire. I mean, you have Bretton Woods, where the dollar became the global reserve currency. You have where the military powerhouse, where the manufacturing powerhouse, we're a stable nation that the kind of world can rely on to kind of.
And we just lost way fewer men.
people.
Yeah, we lost way fewer boys than everyone in Europe. Yeah,
World War I into that, and World War I was kind of the end of the kind of the dynastic reigns. The Ottoman Empire comes to an end.
the Sykes-Picot Agreement
Russian,
splits all of the Middle East into
Yes. The Russian Empire essentially, the Tsars come to an end. The French, the Hungarian, Austrian Empire. Anyway, so we kind of become these democracies or whatever, and we're the best democracy by the end of World War II. Because we don't bear the cost that other nations do.
And we still are.
So, but these great powers that we have, to fight wars and such, kind of come to be used in our own country. I would argue the assassination of JFK has a lot to do with this, and other figures. The devaluing of our own currency, and then you start to looking at what happened during the Cold War. And eventually, something like a 9/11. Okay, so I would say if you look at two things, and a lot of people will equate these two things, Pearl Harbor and 9/11, and there's a lot of revisionist history, if you will. Not saying that's a bad thing, but just people going back and going, there are a lot of people. They had like 5 commissions or something for Pearl Harbor, and there's a lot of pretty good evidence from what I understand, having not studied it in detail, that we did know the attack was coming, that it wasn't a surprise, and that it was essentially an excuse to get into a war Britain wanted us to certainly get into, and we kind of wanted to get into for our own reasons as well. And then people that deny the official narrative on 9/11 say the same thing.
Yeah, they're analogs.
Yeah. Yes.
It was a false flag operation designed to get the most powerful military in the world involved in wars they did not want to be in.
Wait, both Pearl Harbor and 9/11?
Yes.
As this is what
This is
what they say,
this
right?
Is what certain people say.
Right.
Okay.
I'm not saying I believe that, but what I am.
Then let's define false
In
flag.
the ring and say I do believe that.
Yeah.
Then let's define false flag.
And actually, I think that the 9/11 narrative is. I think you're going to find over time a majority of people will probably not believe, will believe it was not inside job is probably not the right way to say it, but essentially a military operation to, in one form or fashion or another, to get us into the very war that happened. I mean, if you look at Pearl Harbor and you look at 9/11 and you look at what happened afterwards, it was the biggest military spending of all time, with the exception of the fact that we've given more money to Ukraine than we spent on our entire time in Afghanistan, which is crazy. Anyway.
Not quite money, but the military-industrial complex is fungible. If we give old rockets, old tanks, old F-16s, we will build new ones, right?
But to try to kind of pull
but it's not money.
I
to
say
this.
all of that just to hint that I'm maybe one of the people that this article has, decided to target and have some fun with.
Yeah.
I actually have not read this article yet. Today is the first time I've heard about this, so this is really interesting to me. How someone's more or less, according to you, they sort of baited the Christian Nationalists into agreeing with Karl Marx.
Mm-hmm. And actually, the article,
and they stood by it.
The article's still there. They just put his real name on it, and they put as an introductory remarks.
Right, they explained it, but then they said we actually agree with a lot of these sentiments, even though.
Yeah.
Well, shall we look at a few of the specific sentiments?
Okay, let's go.
Because one of the things we don't want to do is commit a genetic fallacy, saying just because this idea came from so and so that we hate, it's a bad idea.
Right.
So,
or originates from an ideology of identitarianism,
and he did
which
change
is
words.
Right.
Yeah.
But it originates from, but only as far as identitarianism is concerned.
Sure.
Right.
So what you're saying is it's more or less a hypocrisy, like we change, black with white, and all of a sudden it's a problem when it wasn't before, that sort of thing?
Our identitarian is good, their identitarianism is bad.
I see.
Right, which was the whole idea behind submitting Mein Kampf to the feminists, and is the whole idea of submitting the Communist Manifesto to the Christian Nationalists. It's like, you guys are just as identitarian as the people you hate, and that applies to both of you. Yeah.
Yeah. But what's sort of going on, it seems So, for example, there was a document written by a number of theologians recently called the Antioch Declaration, and it's sort of a document against what seems to be a kind of growing movement in largely reformed circles, sort of traditional, conservative evangelical Calvinist circles, where people are really kind of getting on board with questioning the post-war consensus, and that phrase is used in this document with one other word added. I can't remember. Post-war liberal consensus.
Yeah.
And so the PWC, the post-war consensus, is the conventional wisdom of the end of the World War. Yeah. That everything we've ever been told about whatever the Nazis is true. And now I think,
and they all come back to the Balfour Declaration all the time.
I'm not familiar with that.
Oh, the post-war established the nation of his they got
the rules-based whatever So that gives rise to things like the United Nations. That that gives rise ultimately to open markets and globalism and things like that. And so there is a questioning. Where people are going, well, maybe that wasn't true. Maybe if the end of World War II gave us sort of globalism and the end of nationalism, maybe that's a bad idea. They're probably right to say that because now we're going through a nationalist populist surge, which is what got Trump elected. People are going back to saying, no, that globalism didn't really work out for us very well, which we talked about on the show quite a bit. Let's go back to making America great again, or making Argentina great again, or making France great again. That's what nationalism is all about. And so then people are saying they're taking it one more step, and they're saying, well, what did make America great? Well, it's Western values. Oh, well, where did we get those from? Oh, well, those are Christian values. Oh, well,
you say Western values. Alexis de Tocqueville actually wrote specifically in his book that he wrote after visiting America. He said what makes America great. He said, I looked at their field, at their work ethic, at their all of the aspects of civilization, determined that what made it great came from their churches.
Yes.
So as long as Christianity, or as long as America stands on the Christian foundation,
right,
we're going to be.
And this is where it gets really hairy, right? Because there are people out there who are saying Christianity and Western values; these things have become so synonymous with also, white whatever culture. So there are literal neo-Nazis in this kind of, broadly speaking, this very big, Christian nationalist community. That would, of course, be kicked out by Christian nationalists like Max and myself. But they're out there in the name of Christian nationalism, and they're going around and they're saying, well, these Christian values that led to Western values are really white values, And so anyway, I will say this.
They're getting the chicken before the egg there.
Yeah.
Or the other way around. Cart before horse? Whatever the idiom is.
Sure.
Yeah.
When an argument has been made that, if you look at white civilization compared to the others in the world, there are some demonstrable ways in which they've done they are, I don't hesitate to use the word superior, but if you're going to evaluate the accomplishments of the large families of ethnic groups, the whites are far and far beyond some of the most accomplished. And it's not because of the color of their skin, some argue, it's because that Europe had a 1,000-year head start in Christian values. And as they became more Christian, they became more accomplished and were able to cure more diseases and build more hospitals, more schools, and become more educated. And so we have a long head start over the rest of the world. And those who would argue against the white identity Christian nationalists or whatever adjacent groups they may be, saying, look, it's not about skin, it's about Scripture.
In the language of transubstantiation, whiteness is an accidental property of a culture that was built, or something like that.
And Coleman Hughes loves to talk about these Enlightenment, these Renaissance values, these these are. I'm going to claim that because and he's a black guy. Coleman Hughes is a black intellectual, and he will say things like, the Renaissance. I claim that because I'm a human, right? Yeah. And this is the coolest thing that happened to human history in the last, in all of human history, he would say. In the same way, Neil deGrasse Tyson doesn't say that science is there's white science or indigenous science or an indigenous way of knowing. He's no. Science is testable, empirically verifiable. And
he does believe men can become women.
He was real dodgy on that episode of Bill Maher.
I think he thoroughly face planted. But anyway,
I don't think you read the article that Bill Maher was trying to corner him on. But the problem is, so many whites will say, so many white Christian nationalists will say that these scientific progressions are ours, right? And Neil deGrasse Tyson those are human. those are mine too, right? Like those are ours, capital like O, ours. And so I agree that while those values may have started with and may be like one of the coolest things about America is our multiculturalism, right? It's one of the reasons why we're so good at so many things is because we let 1,000 flowers bloom.
What are some examples of some of those things?
Okay, look at, I know you're going to counter with Israel, but like when you look at like Nobel Prizes, right? They're all over the place, like from all of our different ethnic groups.
The Nobel Peace Prize is 70.
Not Peace Prize, like Nobel Prize.
Oh, Nobel Prize.
Like scientific accomplishments,
okay.
right? Are, they don't happen only to Anglo-Saxons, right?
Sure.
They happen to all of these different people that live in America because we don't care about the color of skin. We let you thrive however you want to. Now, the only country that beats us is Israel, but okay.
Well, we can explore that issue later. I know of a specific study that explains why that phenomenon happens. And I'm not arguing with you about it. I'm saying multiculturalism probably isn't the right word. Mm-hmm. You don't have greatness when you have multiculturalism. You have disunity. So we can have diversity. There's a difference between diversity and multiculturalism. So if we mean lots of people from different backgrounds coming together and joining and assimilating and joining in one sort of symphonic.
Sounds like a distinction without a difference. So distinguish between those two, yeah.
Well, diversity, you would have people from a bunch of different backgrounds coming together and assimilating to a common set of values, goals, and practices. What multiculturalism is a bunch of people from different backgrounds and different languages, all this stuff coming together and not working together. That's why you can go to certain parts of Houston, this very city, and find entire communities who don't speak English. And there's enough of them, they get by on their own.
Or the no-go zones in Sweden.
Right.
Like we've talked about this in the past.
There's some demographics you do speak English. You don't go to those parts of town at night. That's not a unified culture. That's a fractured society. That's why we're failing.
Okay, like.
But if I point to some monocultures that have like high violence, right? You wouldn't say that is a function of cultural melting potism, right? If I point to some monocultures that are high in violence, you would probably come up with another reason to dismiss that.
Well, I would, but it's not flip-flopping on.
But you're talking about values.
I'm saying, well, in the multiculturalism, it's problematic because you have people from those cultures coming in and mixing in with cultures who typically don't have high crime. I mean, you can go to Iceland, you can go to Norway, at least before they started doing mass immigration, perfectly peaceful, incredibly low crime. You go into an ethnic almost an ethnic monostate, that may not be the right word. Hate to say it, like sub-Saharan Africa, very different. Crime is the norm there. And yet those are the types of people that we've decided we're going to take millions of those people and put them in what used to be white Christian European nations, and let's see what happens. Crime goes up.
Scandinavian countries were barely Christian in their history. Like, what are you talking about?
I'm talking about England, Germany, France, some of these, like the bastion of Western civilization and Christianity for centuries. And now, look at their major cities. They are barely recognizable.
I think the sort of question for us and the challenge for us is something like this. Like, I think the reason that the woke right exists, to kind of bring it back to this article, the woke right exists because in the last, arguably 50 years, but really specifically in the last decade or so, it's kind of your average white, male, Christian guy, for right or wrong, whether it's sort of true or not, has felt like it's been said about him that he's the cause of the problems. He's the dope, he's the idiot, he's the racist. Now then the Karens came along, and then they're equally part of the problem too. Kind of the white female version of that. That every problem in this country is because of racism and systematic racism and white supremacy. We went through all that for the last 5 years or so. And now there are people, and they're basically saying, you know what? I didn't do anything wrong when I became white. And actually, my white forebears, they did a lot of great things. They produced great art. They produced, this understanding of limited government. They produced great music. And, there's nothing wrong with that, to which I would say you're right. There isn't anything wrong with that. I would say just like there's nothing inherently wrong with being black, there's nothing inherently wrong with being white either. Mm-hmm. And so what you see is this kind of perhaps probably in many cases, overreaction to a kind of this racial conflict that's been going on, and so I think where they've erred, as James Lindsey points out through this article, is that they're participating in the same kind of grievance politics.
Yes,
okay. And so it's like, well, now we're the victim class, and now we want the special rights, and so we don't want to go there as Christians. I would say but I do think that to the extent that identity matters, and I do think that it does. I don't know where identity is good and identitarianism is bad, but identity matters, and I think that Christians should be able to say, A, we're a Christian nation, and that we want there to be Christian laws. We want Christian culture to be reflected in our country. We want certain things to be incentivized. We want certain things to not be incentivized. And to the extent that we have multiple cultures, as in we talked about this on a previous episode, of that means, Indian people can live here, and sub-Saharan Africans can live here, and Chinese people can live here, and people from all over the world can live here. But we have to have a single culture, a monoculture, where we agree that we are going to pursue the American way, the American culture, the American way of life. Now, what is that?
Is Chinatown the American way of life?
No.
Yeah, you would say no. I'm asking. Yeah.
Chinatown in Houston?
Or in New York, or like is the concept of Chinatown, right? The American way of life.
I'm okay with Chinatown.
Yeah, or
anything else.
Okay.
Oh, I'm okay with it.
Well, I mean, but does it fall under what you said?
They seem to be pretty respectful of my freedom, and they can practice whatever they want, and they can make indigenous food, and it's wonderful. Mm-hmm. So yes, I think.
But it is one of those examples that you guys give of like a bunch of like culturally similar people, some that don't even speak the English language, all living together in a like cluster instead of distributing.
But in a free society, those who don't adapt would suffer the consequences. And what we have is kind of the worst of all worlds. This is why immigration doesn't work, because we're a welfare state. And so if we're going to give money to people, to not assimilate, then that is going to lead to a very broken culture. But in the old world, when people did immigrate, they had to adapt or go back. And many people who did come to America went back. But half of the people.
Go ahead.
I'm just thinking about stuff.
Oh God, no! Tell us what you're thinking.
Oh well, I guess to bring it back to the core of the issue here, I guess I'd have to ask for clarification on what does he mean by woke right? What does woke mean? Because in my experience,
it's the grievance aspect.
Grievance identitarianism.
Okay, yeah.
Right. Like we are the put upon, and we need to take back what belongs to us. Right. The we has very, very tight guardrails. Right.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, if that's our definition of woke, all right. Because when I hear about woke used as an adjective, being like, oh well, that's a woke policy. Typically what it comes down to is it's a corruption of Christian values. It's taking like that is wrong and it should be fixed.
Right. So they're not progressive. They're woke in the sense that they now see their eyes are open to the historic injustices against Western values that have been perpetuated by the post-war consensus.
Then I'd only
try to tie it all together.
I used to like liberalism, and now I don't. I've been awoken. Yeah.
I mean, and look, I think there's some. You have to be very careful because there's crazy people in the fringes. But I do think there are very legitimate criticisms of what America became after World War II. We were culturally infiltrated by communists. The academy is thoroughly Marxist. I don't think that's crazy to say. I don't even know how you would debate it at this point. Well, I think the racial division we see was sown in many respects by Marxists. I think the welfare state we have become is totally. I mean, if you look at the planks of the Communist Manifesto, we have about 6 of them, including things like progressive taxation and a public school system and all sorts of things. The denigration of the family is ripe throughout our culture. The fact that we are an American empire and we do fight endless wars. I mean, there are many, many, many criticisms of America that we are told constantly, we were barraged constantly with like, this is the way it is. You better like it. You know, it's essentially the New World Order, if I could use that phrase, where it's like
the military-industrial complex is yeah.
But it's also, I mean, even Eisenhower in that speech talks about like the technological elite. Like he was so far ahead of his time, I think. Nobody had it. You know, 2 days later, JFK gets in office and he's like, what in the heck have I gotten myself into? Anyway, so I think that, yes, there is a lot of what people tell us, the smart people, the elites, the academy have told us, hey, you just have to sit down and shut up and accept it. We're an empire now, and this is who we are, and the endless debt and the, you know, worthless money and the endless wars and the racial division and this is how it's going to be. The sexual revolution, you know, what Hollywood has become. You just have to live with it. You just have to, and there's a certain amount of people who are, you know, they're like, you know what? Screw this. No, this is not what I want. I'm going to homeschool my kids. I'm going to have some chickens. I'm going to not take your stupid vaccine anymore, you know. And by the way, my kids are going to learn Bach, and you know we're going to watch we're going to watch great movies of the past, and you know that whole kind of off the grid, you know, movement.
But I would know a ton of plumbers that would say teaching your kids Bach and Chopin are like, you know, elitist. You know what I mean? There's elite is a flavor, right?
Yeah.
The elitism, and sure, there's going to be tons of those people that exist, and then tons of people that want to go off grid and don't want to do that. And there's tons of people that want to live in big cities and don't want those things. And there's going to be tons of people that live in big cities and do want to be, you know, elite. They want the culture.
I mean, I believe in freedom. I think America's, you know, free. We can pursue things, but
that's what I care most about.
I think the response to the communist infiltration, and then what kind of maybe hit an apex with you know transgenderism ultimately, but like wokeism before that, and the LGB before that, and the race, you know, riots before that. Okay, like people are kind of there's a cultural movement now. I think there are a lot of, I don't know how significant it is, but there's at least some people who are saying, hey, you know, I want to reverse this. Like, I don't like what America became after World War II. I like America before World War II. You know, and it wasn't perfect, but, you know, no, I mean, I got it. And see, now we're going to get back into the slavery and back into the segregation stuff. We're not pointing you
I couldn't have married my wife, so.
Like, no, I know.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's perfect, but, you know, but I don't think that people are necessarily wrong for saying that what I've been force-fed my whole life in a post-World War II America, where, you know, we're told we're the greatest country, but we keep doing some pretty awful things, you know, or like we keep relying on our foundation, which is truly brilliant and a, you know, a masterpiece of human history and thought and philosophy, and we keep relying on that like that's who we are. That's not who we are. Mm-hmm. I mean, we're way far away from our founding. So I think it makes perfect. I think it's totally justifiable for people to have this instinct, this kind of desire to kind of go back to who we were, to kind of figure out who we were, and so they do want to reform, and then a certain amount of people in that group become Nazis, and that's terrible, you know. But so. But like, because I think they, as Christians, somewhere along the way, we have to know where to put on the brake, right? We have to know where to say, like, whiteness is not synonymous with these values that we think are important, or the America before World War II. But unfortunately, some people equate those things, which makes it easy for someone like James Lindsey to come in and.
I still want to give you a chance to speak.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, that's one of the things where we have to clarify. It's like, no, we don't. There are certain things when you look back at the 1950s, the 40s, the 30s, there are good things about those eras. We don't want to go back to the 50s. We want to move forward and take what was good about those and cultivate them forward and get rid of all the nonsense that's kind of crept in since then.
Well, that's my anarchic position. I'm not a progressive because I want to pick and choose the good things that have happened since World War II and the good values that existed before without having to pick a side. I want a buffet of things that I can say yes and no to without having to, and that's anarchism, right? That's not nationalism where you have one edict from the federal government telling everyone to be the same, right? Anarchism is saying, like, I like those, values of family and relationships, and I want to keep those, but, like, I really don't like the racial identitarianism that existed back then. We definitely shouldn't bring it back now, right? You can have one without the other.
Potentially.
Ooh.
But for the most part, I agree. And that's where, at least my school of Christian nationalism offers an immense amount of freedom, where the federal government is only concerned with the essentially the Ten Commandments, with preventing murder and.
So where does immigration fall in the Ten Commandments?
That's a good question. I'll have to think about that. But
Well, if
one
you
thing
don't
I
if you don't have
failed
a
to-
welfare state, I think.
Well, you can't simultaneously say it's a welfare state, but they're also taking American jobs, right?
Well, that's fair. And one thing I failed to address in that big Christian nationalism speech a few months ago was the definition of a nation. A nation is a particular people in a particular place, and some would argue within a particular time. And even the Bible says God appoints the nations; He sets their boundaries and their appointed times. So God creates the nations. And so if that's a correct definition, a particular people in a particular place, then what America is essentially is a 2-century-long experiment in saying we don't have to be a particular people, just a particular set of ideals, just a particular set of values. And I believe the experiment is failing. I wish it wasn't, but
those particular people that God chose were neither racially exclusive. You have Rahab, right, and stories like that, and who married Boaz? Ruth. And yeah. They're neither racially exclusive, nor are they geographically located. They were constantly in exile.
and yet she
right?
said, your people shall be my people. They integrated, they assimilated, they became.
I agree. But neither of the things that the new Christian nationalist right wants to have, which is like this geographic location and this like white group of American values, right? Neither of those are I'm not a super Old Testament guy, but neither of those are exclusive in God's vision of the Old Testament. You welcome in people like Rahab and Ruth, and like when you're in exile, you're still praying to Yahweh.
Well, that's fair, but I would argue to that, and this may not negate what you said, but Israel was special because God chose Israel as His chosen nation as a type, shadow, model of true Israel, spiritual Israel, which is His elect from every nation, tribe, and tongue. And so even in that, it could be an exception to the rule.
I don't say amen a lot, but I'm saying amen to that. Like, heck yeah.
I mean, I'll say like where we're sitting right now, like this whole floor on Sunday is about 100 Ethiopians,
Sure.
who are Lutherans,
Yeah.
and so I would have a lot more in common with them than probably your average white progressive, who lives next door to me, right? So we have almost everything in common in terms of, like income and, what street we live on or the color of our skin. But I have nothing in common with them if they're an atheist progressive or something, right? So I think a real question is what shapes culture? I think that's a question we're wrestling with as a culture right now. And I think we're trying to, in America, we're trying to have, I don't think we have a common culture, first of all. I don't think we have a common worldview, a way to seeing the world. I would, to summarize, religion shapes culture more than anything else by far.
Well, we don't have a common culture, and I think I'm the only one that hears it, and that's not so bad. Like, I kind of like that.
Depends on how you define
because you get to
like
pick and choose.
Yeah, if it's a buffet of interesting experiences, yes. But if it's a way of determining law, no.
Even ideologies. No, I'm fine with the Amish having their own law governing their own communities. I'm fine with that.
Well, what about
Right.
shame killings in an Islamic in Dearborn, Michigan?
I mean, that is
If a Muslim daughter marries a white guy.
So my one asterisk is voluntarism, right? And that's the reason I pointed to the Amish is because it's an extremely voluntaristic community, right? They have this concept of Rumspringa. They don't shame like when people leave, right? They're welcome to come back.
I don't know how true that is. I think the Amish are a little bit more culty than some of them.
They're very culty. No. They're very culty. But like when you leave, they don't go out and kill you.
No.
Right? Like they let you leave. And if you want to come back because life in here is better than life out there, they let you come back.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm totally fine with people doing that as long as it's voluntary.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Somebody asked one of the people on stage Tuesday night, is communism and Christianity, right?
Mm-hmm. And that was what drove a lot of this article, was that within Christian circles, there is a concern that, Marxism is sort of highly prevalent in the Christians' response to that. I mean, I generally agree that is true.
Well, my answer to that is, if it's voluntary, I completely see a communist, like a commune that can be Christian.
Sure.
Right? It probably looks a lot more like Acts than like what we currently have in most of our churches.
Yeah.
And I'm totally fine with communism as long as it's voluntary, right? This is the anarchist in me. I don't want anyone pointing a sword at somebody else and saying, do what I demand.
I actually would be really interested to see that played out in real life.
Yeah, I
It's
know.
nothing but a social experiment.
Sure.
Let's see how this plays out.
I don't think it works more than 100 people.
I think there's only like one, like on Earth right now. Maybe a handful, but they don't work for all.
Well, there were some in Israel before they got killed on October 7th.
Communes?
The kibbutzim were very, very, they were radically socialist.
It's fitting considering who came up with communism to begin with.
Well, hold on. Ludwig von Mises was a Jew too. He came up with Austrian economics. Calm down.
Well, you asked what shapes culture. Well, let's look at the root of the word culture. It's cultus. It's Latin for worship.
Yeah.
And so you're right, it is religion that shapes. And so when we say multiculturalism, it's what culture isn't, like a diversity of culture isn't different foods and different music and different whatever.
Well, what is that then? What is that then?
That's just the organic.
That's just diversity.
That's just the organic. That's a particular people in a particular place using what grows in a particular place that shapes their particular. We need a different word for culture.
You talked about it before. You said you can have diversity as long as you have a single culture.
Right. So I want a monoculture over the entire earth, and that is the Christian culture.
Right.
But within it, have immense diversity of language and food.
Right.
And
so this
music
is
and
my
all these
example of
things that we love
my
and enjoy.
Ethiopian friends. Right. Mm-hmm. So they're from halfway around the world. They speak a different language. They look different, and yet they're But since we are Christians, we have one culture. Yeah. Like we share a view of the world in the most important ways, in terms of family, in terms of law, in terms of how we're to live, in terms of charity, in terms of home ownership. I mean, almost anything you could think of, we agree. And so, but we don't have to speak the same language. That's the power of Christianity.
But wasn't that one of y'all's prerequisites for nationalism? Is speaking the same language?
Yes. So we're saying,
well,
I want separate nations that have their own lowercase c culture, I guess you'd say, with the different aspects. But I want all those nations to worship the same God and to follow the same commandments.
Well, I want them to.
And like on Sunday to keep. Sorry.
Oh, well, go.
They will. I agree. Yeah, I agree.
On Sunday, they use their a native language, but in a generation they will speak English because when they go to get their driver's license, the test is in English. Although you can vote in 4 languages in Harris County, which is I don't know what I think about that.
But is that because of their religion or because they're here in America, which is still majority English speaking?
Is what because of what?
The fact that in a generation they will speak English.
Because they're in America and they'll need to. Just like this church was founded by Germans in the 1840s, and by the maybe the late 1890s or so.
Talk to second or third generation Latino immigrants.
Yes, I know many Hispanic people in Houston, and they do not speak Spanish. They're like, no, I mean my parents spoke a little, and my grandparents that's all they speak. But over time, that's just enculturation. But we do need to kind of wrap it up.
Sure.
I mean, I think it's an interesting troll that James Lindsey pulled off. I don't know anything about that magazine. I do think that there are problems within the kind of broadly speaking, I guess you would say the response to wokeism.
Say the name of the declaration again.
The Antioch Declaration.
Antioch. I'm going to look that up after this. Yeah. I'm very curious.
And So I do think it can become problematic when people say Western/white is the same as Christianity. Mm-hmm. But it can also be a problem when people say that all cultures are the same. Yeah. We do want to fight for a Christian culture because we do believe that Christ is king. And we do believe that God's law still has validity in the civil sphere and obviously the moral sphere. So it can be...
And as a Tolstoy fanboy, I think fighting for a Christian culture, those two are...
Well,
like
fight, I'm not
oxymorons.
Saying,
I know.
Crusade sword and whatnot.
Well,
but, argue for. Yeah.
I see a lot of these reformed guys have like Crusader logos when they're talking about.
That's a great example.
I mean, it's cringe.
Yeah, but that's the very culture of the Antioch Declaration is sort of speaking against.
Exactly.
Well, and having friends of mine who the whole Antioch Declaration was written as not an attack. What's the right word? As a response to what they were saying.
Repudiation of them.
Repudiation of people who I know personally. And having read the Antioch Declaration, I'm not going to tell you to sign or not sign, but I would encourage you to be discerning and maybe patient, maybe wait a little while before making that decision. Because there's things that in it that may prove problematic later on if you do sign it, and there are information going to come out that may inform your decision later. But just going back
Winston
to, because
Churchill?
I'm not, well, that and many, many.
I don't think that was in it, was it?
It's
No,
not.
Okay.
I'm just trying to tie the threads together.
Okay.
We are more or less on the cusp of, well, if not deeply into it, a split in the Reformed community, and what it's going to be over is going to be a matter of debate for many years to come, and will probably be discussed on this show at some point.
Yeah. Cool.
And I'd be happy to lend whatever little bit of information I have on it later. But just going back to
That's a teaser.
But
we got to wrap it up.
There may be people who compares like Christianity is white culture, and I think that's wrong. On the other hand, if we're going to take a look at some of these white Christians who say, like, we've been put upon for decades, we've been the real victims here, and we need to push back on it finally, we need to grow a spine. I guess the only question, the first of many questions I would ask is say, well, is it true? Let's look at the facts. Let's look at the history and then step back and see what we find.
And my question is, when you say push back on it, by doing what? Because these are the, like, repeal the 19th guy, right? I mean,
I would say reclaim the institutions.
Well, that and saying, like, you can call us a racist or this, that, and the other, and we don't care anymore. We don't care.
I don't care, but, like, I'm not going to go and, anyways.
That was a weapon used, kind of by the progressive left. It's like anytime you would say much of anything, it was like, well, you're a race. Anyway, the R word had power, and I think the homophobe word, the transphobe, they don't have power anymore, because I think the Christian now is kind of this, I don't know, coming out of the shadow and saying, look, I think we should be more explicit in promoting a Christian culture. Proposing it, not with swords, I would say, not with whatever. We're not fighting crusades, but we need to not be ashamed of it. And I think after World War II, again, there became sort of certain mantras that you just had to believe about the greatness of America and what that meant, and slowly it eroded specifically explicit Christian claims. And I think there is a movement to get back to those kind of radically explicit claims. But within that movement, there are people that I would radically disagree with, that I think are making way too many associations, and they should. So that's what. Yeah. Anyway.
We need a spin-off podcast.
I guess so. Okay, Ken, where can people find you?
At Theology by the Pint. I'm not telling you jokers where I work.
There we go.
Yeah.
And where can people find you, Max?
You can find me at a website called molluskman.com.
Sounds interesting.
I like snails. It's fun.
Okay, all right. And I'm going to go to the Evan Cam, which I've only used like once. Anyway, I'm Evan. I'm the pastor at First Lutheran. Make them nervous every time I say that. But flhouston.org. And, of course, do go to theologybythepint.org to learn about our events coming up, to learn how you can help us. We're a nonprofit. We don't advertise. It's totally reliant on people being generous to this ministry and helping us survive. Come to our events. I think if you give $50, $50 a month, you can come to every event for free. It's kind of almost pays for itself. Almost. Anyway, check it out, theologybythepint.org. And until next time, we encourage you to question freely, think deeply, and disagree as needed.
Peace.